Okay, and again, I'd just like to officially welcome everyone to the session. And with that, I'm going to pass it first to our president, Corey, to do a welcome, and then it can come back to me.
Great, thank you, Maria. So because we had one of these last week, so I do recognize a lot of names and faces. So I don't need as much of an introduction, but I'm Corey Pine, president of OCMA. I'm down here in Windsor, Ontario. A little bit better weather, but oddly enough, it rained again last night. So last week I wanted to present this from the woods, and I could have done it again, except the woods are still muddy. So still back at home having to do this. For today's session, just some personal thoughts to segue in. I watch a lot of British television, probably entirely too much British television. And the one great infuriating thing about British language is that they shorten the word math to maths. And it's annoying when you do it. But their explanation is, well, there's more than one math. So of course we do it, shorten it as maths. And then you start thinking about it, well, I mean, there's algebra and there's geometry and there's statistics. So I guess we can go along and say that there's more than one math. But as I've taught in the college system now for 12 years, it becomes much more apparent that we have more maths than just the disciplines. So we have the math that's apparent in the trades, we have math that's in the health sciences, we have math that's in business. And then every once in a while, for the real true math geeks, we're lucky and we have the real math that's in the engineering and all the highly abstract things that really got us going when we were younger. So in some sense, there are multiple ways that we can say that there are multiple maths. And hopefully through today's session, Shrista will guide us through ways of even tending that idea even further. And both there are multiple types of maths and multiple experiences of maths. And being mindful of these will help us to reach our students better and have both firmer understanding and further usage of math. So it's on the surface of it, it's a very non-mathy thing to do. But I think when we get into it, it's going to be a highly something that we actually naturally, and Trish going to help us bring it out and show that what we're doing is actually something that's quite unusual in the education sphere and something that's greatly needed. So Shrista will be presenting with us. She actually has a team behind her that helped to present this. And in the fall at the OCMA conference, Shrista and her team will be presenting on expanded version. So you're very welcome to contact her throughout the time, and also in the fall attend their more expanded version of this workshop. Right, so thank you everyone for coming along, and now we're back to Maria.
Thanks, Corey. Okay, wonderful. So we'll get started. Again, just one more reminder, because a few people did join us as Corey was talking. Please have your name in the participants list, and we'll have ample opportunities for question and answers throughout the presentation, as well as Q&A plus discussion at the end. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed guest and presenter today, Shrista Chopra from Centennial College. Shrista, if you'd like to share your screen. And we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
All right. Well, esteemed, I don't know how, but a good morning, everyone. My name is Srishta Chopra, and I'm a learning strategist math specialist, and I'm from the Learning Center at Centennial College. As Corey and Maria mentioned, I do have like a team of math learning strategists that we work together. So even though I'm presenting today and the others couldn't be here due to several different reasons, know that a lot of research and a lot of my thoughts and understandings and reflections came through our conversations together. So with that, let's move on. Okay, so I'll start with land acknowledgement. And generally, what we do is if we were in person, I would do a land acknowledgement for Centennial College because that's where I'm located. But right now, because we are all at home, so what I'm going to do is I'll do an acknowledgement of where I'm at, okay, where I live. And I'll also talk about how to make your land acknowledgement a bit more meaningful as well at the same time. So to begin, I actually wrote it down so that I don't miss acknowledging it in the right way. Um, I acknowledge that the land that I'm standing on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that this land is covered by Williams treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. And I truly acknowledge that as my role as a settler, that I definitely need to be more mindful and always work towards our relationships with the indigenous peoples at the same time to make a land acknowledgement even more meaningful, not just like acknowledging so that it becomes just a lip service. You should also be talking about self-reflections, which I will talk as I will be mentioning my the positioning ourselves. But right now, I also want to talk about reflections of what's happening right now or what just happened recently. And you probably realized with what I'm wearing today, I'm wearing orange today, and with this Every Child Matters thing. And I want to acknowledge, and I'm deeply saddened by what we've just found out in Kamloops residential school, the 215 children's graves that we found there. So we really need to work our way up towards good relationships and really work towards these wrongdoings and make sure that these are corrected in some ways. Okay, so with that, I also want to give you an action item, right? So let me actually get out of this mode. Sorry about that, but I want to share a link with you all. As an action item. So this is an open resource that was created by Centennial College Indigenous Peoples. It was in collaboration with all the Indigenous peoples. It's not just someone just wrote from Centennial College. It's like a great, huge collaboration. And it's a free open resource. So I'm going to be sharing this link and I would encourage every one of you to definitely, let me go to the chat. So definitely to go through it. It is very heavy, it is intense, and it'll take you a while to go through it and read through it, but definitely give it a try. Okay. So that's my action item. Let me go back to our presentation. Okay, so now that I've done the land acknowledgement and I told you about how to make it even more meaningful, let's talk about positioning ourselves as well. Now, generally, what would happen is everyone would be positioning themselves in a session or a meeting or a get together. But right now, because there are so many of you, I'm going to do one myself. And but this is how the way you would go about it. You'll actually talk about your name, your role, your ancestors and background, because you're trying to really position where you're from, how you came to be here in Canada as Turtle Island, really. So my name is Srishta Chopra, and I'm a learning strategist math specialist here at Centennial College. I am of settler identity. Both my parents are from India, and me and my sister were born and raised in India. Our first language is Punjabi, but I speak Hindi due to being from the north of India and speak English as India's past British rule. It became an official language of the country. I am married to a settler who is also from India. I came to the lands in 2004 and acknowledge that as treaty people, I have a responsibility towards honoring our relationships and towards truth and reconciliation. I also identify myself as a math educator, a poet, and a lifelong learner. I'm passionate about teaching and learning, and making math accessible to all. Decolonizing and indigenizing knowledge is close to my heart as it resonates with my beliefs on many levels. I'm looking forward to learning and sharing today through this session. And just a disclaimer about the session as well. Um, Whatever we are going to talk about, a lot of it is actually coming from our readings that I did. And um, as I said before, my team, the Math Learning Strategist team, is part of that research group where they try to find really good resources, especially Matthew. He found so many good resources for me to read and come up with this presentation. So a lot of my learnings are, so I'm just sharing those learnings with you. Okay. And if I am mentioning anything about indigenous math or indigenizing, please keep that in mind, that I'm actually just sharing what I learned from the readings, and I know and I truly understand that indigenization only comes with collaboration and consultation with indigenous peoples, and not just by us as settlers. Keeping that aside, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. Um, so the session's goal is to begin a journey of decolonizing ourselves and our subject area by critically reflecting on the assumed truths and values in math, teaching and learning, to explore the ideas of equity as well and inclusion, and consider how to share this with others. And that's an important bit as well. All right. So we'll start with a Jamboard discussion. Okay. So if I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jamboard. Jamboard is a Google Jamboard. It's by Google, and it's a free resource. And it's a collaborative platform. It's almost like a whiteboard, but also like a slides show or something where multiple people can collaborate together. So what I'll do is I'll share the link to the Jamboard with all of you. Whoa, that's not right. There is my. So what I would strongly suggest is please click on this link, the Jamboard link, and come to this page. Also take a look at what I'm doing on the shared screen for now, just so that you know how to go about using the Jamboard, and then you can start sharing your thoughts. So first and foremost, if you notice this Jamboard, the first screen is just like talking about decolonization and equity right now, right? It's my first slide. But if you look at this arrow button up there, right? I hope everyone can see me pointing to the arrow button. Uh, go to that arrow and go to the second frame. So this is what we're talking about right now, okay? So we'll be trying to answer, what does equity and inclusion mean to you personally? What do these terms mean to you in your educative practice? So please try to answer these two questions, or either one of them. And this is how I would ask you to go about it. Like if you look at the left-hand side, you'll see there are multiple ways in which you can actually share. Um, there's a pen, of course. Okay, so you can write using that pen, right? You can erase. There is an eraser there. There is a sticky note icon as well. You can actually use sticky notes to answer what you want to share. You can also use images if that is what, like if you want to share through images what you are thinking, right? And there's a text box tool as well. So, and of course you can draw circles. I don't know why you would want to, but you could draw circles too. And this is just a pointer, okay? So please try to answer these two questions. What does equity and inclusion mean to you personally? What do these terms mean to you in your educative practice? We'll take a couple of minutes here. And also at this moment, if you have any questions so far, um, please put them in the chat as well, so that, or we can maybe answer them right now. Okay, I see a couple of responses already. Respecting everyone and taking pride in who you are, non-discrimination, space for everyone, equal opportunities. Okay, it's good. Derek, are there any questions right now?
No, there's no questions from the chat yet.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Awareness of diverse learners. Please also try to answer the second question. What do these terms mean to you in your educative practice as well? Consulting with learners to identify and break down barriers to learning. That's a very good one. Awareness of diverse learners, creating everyone fairly, creating a space where everyone feels welcome. Okay, fair making or marking practices, providing the right accommodation, multiple means of learning. Awesome. You guys are awesome. Okay, this is great. Please feel free to populate this as much as possible. Okay. Whoa. Okay. Let me see if we can arrange it in such a way that I can read to make sure all my teaching and resources addresses the, oh, wow. Okay. Try to include everyone in the, okay. Addresses different learning abilities, and this is great. Awesome. So what we'll do is we'll try to move on, but please keep sharing. Okay, whatever thoughts are coming into your mind, share here. If you have questions, please share them in the chat so that I can take it up. Derek can share that with me during our Jamboard breaks. So we're going to do some more Jamboard later as well, so feel free to work on this. I'm going to move back to our presentation. Okay, so we just talked about this, and you gave so many thoughts here. So let's actually bring out some definitions from some of the readings that I did, and we'll try to even further enhance those definitions or thoughts from what you've also shared. Um, so this is from actually a resource that I read by Padilla and Tan, and I am actually going to be sharing links with you all the readings that we did. And Padilla and Tan actually reference Waytaller and Artile's definition of inclusive practices. Inclusive practices is an ongoing struggle towards the redistribution of access to and participation in quality opportunities to learn. So everyone was talking about how it should be with consultation, right, with the learners and really redistributing. So redistribution of access to and participation in quality opportunities to learn. Okay. And then part B, it talks about the recognition and valuing of all student differences as reflected in content, pedagogy, and assessment tools. So we will be talking about some of the um, content and pedagogy as well as we go along. But we need to recognize how student differences is it represented in the content, or the way we are actually imparting the content, is that being addressed or not. Part C, the creation of more opportunities for non-dominant groups to advance claims of educational exclusion and respective solutions. So non-dominant groups. Now think about it in your mind who the non-dominant groups might be. Okay, who is the dominant group? So recognizing those two aspects as well is so crucial, because only then you can create more opportunities for those who are not dominant in math learning. Okay, so the representation dimension, that's what they're calling it in this case. That's very important too. Now, Padilla and Tan, who actually referenced this definition in their article by Waytaller and Artiles, they add a fourth dimension and call it dialectical self-advocacy and self-determination. and how that's also important. So the opportunity for the learners, not just learners, like whoever is the non-dominant group or the various groups in your classroom, for them to be able to self-advocate, like there should be that environment in the room and self-determination, right? So they should be able to do that with the content, with the way you're teaching and things like that. So that's very important as well. So uh, from this reading, this was one of the key moments that I found out, like it was talking about inclusive practices, and this was really, um, it was just in my face, like, wow, this is really good and really well talked about. Um, Please feel free to share in the chat what you think about it. Okay, so it'll be great. It will be a good opportunity for me to read later as well. All right. So this was from another reading by Roos, 2019, and it talks about inclusion as an ideology and as a way of teaching as well. And the rest of the presentation, you might notice, is going to be trying to follow these two aspects in these two categories as well. So when the notion of inclusion is used as an ideology, the most extensive discourse concerns equity in mathematics education, right? When it is used as a way of teaching, the most extensive discourse relates to teaching interventions for mathematical engagement. So we are talking about philosophically what it means, right? And how we can incorporate that in the mathematics education, like the thought process and the structure of it. But at the same time, how it's used in the way of teaching, we also want to talk about the teaching interventions or for mathematical engagement as well. So these two aspects we're going to be discussing in detail in the next few slides today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. So we'll start with inclusion as an ideology, as mentioned by Roos. And we're going to be discussing equity in mathematics education and content. And for that, before we do anything, let's talk about various isms and dominating colonial view in math content and education. Um, this is from another of the readings that I did. Um, and it's essentially just talking about what are different forms of oppressions, right? And it's also talking about, remember I was asking you, what do you think who's the dominant subgroup, right? And not just in life, but also in education. So there are different ways, different forms of oppressions, including racism, classism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, ageism, ethnocentrism, religious imperialism, and colonialism. Oppressions work as an interconnecting web that reinforce one another and are created and maintained through discourses of difference. The oppressing group maintains power by ascribing value and dominance to a constructed identity that is white, male, middle class, university educated, heterosexual, able bodied, English speaking, young or middle aged, Christian, and so on. Now, think about this and try to reflect on the math that you teach or learn. Okay. What about the voices that you see in most of the mathematical textbook, right? The way it's represented, even if it's a female voice, how it's being presented to you, how is it being delivered to you, right? Or is there even a lot of female voices, or is there any other LGBTQIA plus community voices in mathematical education? How many are there? Can you count them? Can you actually count the voices from different cultures in math, right? Or is it going to be hard for you? And you can actually, when you actually bring out some of the names, it's mostly going to be a white person, male, middle-aged, right? English speaking. Like, think about that. That's just one way of thinking about it. Like the voices that you see, the textbooks that you read, or books that you read, not just in math, but for anything really. But also in terms of the way it's being delivered. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you have any questions, please feel free to share, or even your thoughts and reflections on this. Okay. Right. So the next few slides, if you've actually attended our last session in October, you might see some of the next few slides are talking about the similar part, but I thought when we are talking about inclusion as an ideology, this was very important. And whenever you're talking about equity, decolonization is very important as well. So let's talk about what is mathematics, okay? And for that, I would again go back to our beautiful Jamboard link, which I'm hoping I can find back. Um, okay. Huh. Okay, something went wrong. Strange. So we are in the Jamboard. Remember, we were on the second screen when we were sharing. But what we'll do right now is move on to the third screen. So if you again go back to the arrow, so we are going back to the Jamboard link, okay? So the arrows button here, so forward arrow, third page, okay? And what is mathematics? Okay, I saw someone saying it is maths. That is true, maths, right? And that's very interesting because you're using, and I forgot to mention this before, but thank you so much, Corey, for starting the session the way you did. That was amazing introduction because it's opening our way into the discussion that we're going to do right now. So it is maths, right? Okay, we'll talk more about that. Language of science, numbers and patterns, great. Anyone else? Please feel free to share. Again, as I said, in the link, we are on the third screen, okay, from the arrows, forward arrows. The language we use to explain the world around us, it is about logic, relationships, numbers, a language to describe science of numbers, beautiful art, science, it is art. Okay. Science of numbers, beauty, connections, a method for communicating logic, patterns, and relationships, etc. It is about logic. Do you notice the responses that you are actually giving here? A lot of it is noun based. Did you notice that? Some of them, yes, I see some of them are verb action based, but most of them, do you notice it's like it is something, it is a noun, right? Oh, that's an interesting one. Our mathematics presents the rhythms of the planet and the patterns that are repeated in all forms and at all levels of life. It does not. Wow, this is very cool. So definitely, let me move this if I can, so we can read it better. Oh, wow. Okay. Conversely, our mathematics also presents us in these harmonies, enacting not the modernist separation, alienation, and exile from the natural world, but add attunement to the pulse of the planet. That's great. It is philosophy, connections. This is awesome. Please feel free to keep going at it. Okay. In the interest of time, I will move back to our presentation so that we are able to keep some room for questions as well. Have there been any questions so far, Derek? Maybe we can answer them right now.
No, there hasn't been any questions come up in the chat.
Okay. Again, please feel free to ask. Yes.
Maria, I just want to mention also that Paul added, when you were on your previous slide about the oppression, he added autism as well. I didn't know if you had a chance to see that. We just wanted to include that from Paul as well.
Sorry. Okay, in the second slide, right?
Just when you were going through the oppression slide and just talking about the different types of oppression, he included his comment there.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
It's in the chat, you say, right? Okay. Thank you so much, Paul. There you go. Okay, this is great. Awesome. This is great. Okay, let's move on to the slides because as I mentioned, we are talking about decolonization, right? So let's see how we see math right now and how we should actually see math. Let me go back to our slideshow. Right. So, have you noticed that the way you wrote about most of them, most of you, not everyone, wrote about it was in terms of a very absolutist thing, like it's almost like it's universal or something. Noun, it's a noun, so most of it is art or it is like maths. Well, the maths basically, if you dig a bit deeper, you can maybe talk about it in multiple ways, so it doesn't stay universalist anymore, but still, like there most of the words that you've used is either universalist, relativist, that is either this or that, right? Absolutist, like it is the universal truth, this is absolute, right? Noun, and a lot of it is also Euro American and colonial. That's how we've viewed math so far, right? Like it is geometry or just this or that, but there is more to it, right? So this is how you should be trying to see it, that it is pluralist. So the maths, the word maths was a good idea of talking about, but there was a term coined by Stavro, actually Guterres, in one of the readings, and he called it mathematics. Mathematics, the X in the mathematics was about it being not just one kind of math, but more X, like there are lots. Okay, so mathematics. It is cross cultural. So when you're talking about math, don't just see it in terms of this colonial way of thinking. We're not saying that that's not right. Okay, what we've done so far, the modern mathematics, like sorry, the discoveries and all those things that we did, the advances that we've done in mathematics, is great. That's definitely one way of seeing it, though. Okay, that's one way of Euro-American way of seeing it, but there are different ways of seeing it, and it all depends on different cultures, where you're from. And you might have already noticed that this in the class population that you see, students, and many of them might be international, or even if they are not international, they have their own experiences that go with the math that they learn, or they share with you. And the way they've done math in, say, China might be different than how it's done here. So there are multiple ways. So math is not just about different fields in math, like geometry or things like that, but also about different ways of seeing it, the different experiences that come with it. So we call two-eyed seeing is basically the Euro-American way of seeing it, as well as the indigenous way of seeing math. But this could be applied to, say, multiple cultures as well. There's a very interesting video that I always like to share uh, with everyone on two-eyed seeing. And if we have time, we'll try to watch at least a part of it later. But it's amazing. I have put that in our resource section as well, so you will have a link to it if you want to watch it later, even if we don't get to it. Another thing to note about is verb, right? It being math should be a verb, it should be a way of learning. Okay, it's not just about this or that, but it's how like there should be a path to it, an action to it. That's what the math would be, or mathematics really. And that's the decolonized way of looking at math, right? A pluralist way, a cross-cultural way, two-eyed seeing, and recognizing there's not just one way of seeing it or knowing it or learning it or hearing it. It's multiple ways of doing it. Okay, so of course that with it comes into play the indigenizing of mathematics as well. And as I said before, indigenization doesn't just come with us deciding, okay, I've decolonized now, I'm going to start putting in stuff in my curriculum that is going to be indigenous in nature. Maybe I'll put a TP question in and things like that, because that could lead to tokenism as well. So you need to be very mindful of that. We'll talk about that in a bit as well, that indigenizing math is very important, because we are, of course, acknowledging, as I said in our land acknowledgement, acknowledging our relations with the land, as well as the peoples who are living in this land. And we as settlers have that responsibility. But at the same time, it's not just that either. It's about when you're actually indigenizing math or decolonizing mathematics, you are creating an equitable environment as well in the room, because you'll know when you actually see different ways of knowing and being math, it is going to be useful for not just one culture but for everyone. So not just indigenizing math but also thinking about culturally responsive math, that's very important too. Okay. Of course, this session, as I said, is more about decolonization, and I by no means are qualified to talk about how to indigenize, how you should indigenize math. If I do mention some of the indigenizing pieces, it's going to be from the readings that I read. So this is what each of these terms mean. If you're wondering, what is decolonization? What is indigenization? I got this from, and I've sourced this here as well, so for your reference. Decolonization, in its most robust sense, involves the dismantling of colonial power structures, be they political, epistemic, or social, with the ultimate goal of repatriating indigenous land and life. However, when we are thinking about it in terms of academic context, right? When the term decolonization is used in academic context, it typically refers to theoretical, methodological, and praxis-centered approaches that actively decenter the dominance of Euro-Western structures of knowing. So you want to know the math, not just in one way, the Euro-Western way that you've seen most of your life, but also to see it and know it in different ways, right? And that's the basically decentering of that dominant view to multiple views. And indigenizing, as I said before, is a process to respect, value, and promote indigenous languages, knowledges, perspectives in traditionally Euro-Western institutions. Indigenization should be led by indigenous peoples and should respect indigenous intellectual sovereignty, namely indigenous leadership and self-determination, regarding the teaching and study of indigenous knowledges, languages, and methodologies. So that is very important to know as well, that it always comes with consultation and collaboration. So you could decolonize yourself, you could decolonize your math, but the indigenizing needs to happen with consultation. Okay. Inclusion as a way of teaching. Let's talk about that as well, because now we want to also intervene into the practices that we do. So teaching interventions for mathematical engagement. Again, a lot of parts from the ideology pieces are also going to kind of migrate here too, because you want to have that philosophical view as at the same time. So I don't know where this came from, but that wasn't me. Okay. What values are present in the way we do mathematics? Right, let's talk about that. What do you think? Does anyone want to share in the chat? I'm going to view the chat for a couple of minutes now. What values are present in the way we do mathematics now that we've learned about decolonizing, etc.? Anyone? Critical thinking? Okay. I see someone wrote here, I saw math is universal and the colonization part had to do with the way that things are calculated or examples or case studies used. So
Yeah, Shrista,
yeah,
just if you scroll up a bit, you'll actually see that Eden has a question first before that comment.
okay,
It says, can you provide an example of decolonial math? And then
right.
then the comment.
Okay, that's a very, yes. So yes, when you're talking about math is universal and the question, yeah, because it's related, right? Math is universal. You could say that in some ways, but not everyone views the math the same way that you learned about it. Okay. And that's why the term two-eyed seeing was very important, because you might be doing similar things, but maybe the way you see it is different. Okay. So in this slide and the next slide, you'll see a bit more of this. So for example, what values are present in the way we do mathematics? So let's actually change the slide here. decontextualization, generalizability, because have you noticed that many times, like, oh, okay, so there are different ways, I did is there a generalizing formula or something? Everything is reduced to generalization in many of our math. We're not saying that that's not. Generalization is also very important in math, so that it actually can open up different avenues of thinking about the particular ways, right, and how it changes. But that's how it is, right? Quantification and connection to monetary worth. A lot of it is to do that with that. Humans as the most important being. That's the ultimate thing. So every question, most of the time, it's related to humans, and they are on the highest hierarchy in the system. Like everything is about that one Homo sapiens. You know, um, so that's something, that's how we see mathematics or do mathematics. There is a single right answer. Again, that's another way, that's always the way most of the time that we do mathematics. What values should be present in the way we do mathematics is about non-generalizability and relevance. So generalizability is fine in some cases, but not always, and there should be some relevance. A lot of contextualization is important. So life context, yes, that is true, and I see word problems like all the time. But it is really, is it that those word problems are really properly real life? Is the context really there, like completely there? Is it just like, okay, this is one problem, let me convert it into word problem, so that it's relevant? Sometimes even the numbers that we use in those questions, they don't feel correct or right in that scenario, right? And we just have it because, okay, students should be able to do that much type of calculations, like they should be able to do that level of calculation or whatever, right? So we put in numbers that don't even make sense in that context sometimes. And the context is not that well developed either, because if you want to make it real life, it's not so perfect. That there are a couple of things that are happening but there's more. For example, there was an example of tokenism that I read in one of the readings. When you say, for example, you're like, okay, let me indigenize my math or decolonize it, right? So I'm going to put a TP question in, okay, about TP. So of course, what is a TP? It looks like a cone, right? It's a cone, and so let's talk about the volume, how many people can be there, and things like that, okay? But think about TP in real life. Is it just a perfect cone, first of all? Maybe not, right? Because it will have bulges where people are sitting on the corners, and it might be because it's not a solid thing, right? TP is not a solid thing, it's a cloth, right? So people might be leaning on the cloth, so it's bulging out, so volume goes out of the window in the perfect sense, right? And then you're thinking about there are holes in it, right, for entrance, and maybe for holes for the smoke to pass out, right? So there are lots of things happening in it. So when you're thinking about context, the cultural context, you need to really think about all those aspects as well. So it's not just about, here's a TB question, it's perfect for my conic sections talking about cones, let's just put it in, right? That's not how it would work. The environmental context is also very important. And also, when you're talking about math, it's talking about, you need to be talking about ethics of interdependence and learning from relatives. Relatives? Who are the relatives? We'll talk about that in a minute as well. Flourishing of multi-species. There are different ways of knowing, seeing, doing, and being in mathematics. So keep that in mind as well. Let's move on. All right, so I talked about that. Now I'm also going to be introducing, this is something that you might have heard about already, an activist theory. It's getting some traction in the education world. Um, and we'll try to talk about it and it's related to how lots of the aspects in it is talking about many a decolonized view, okay? And activism is a way of understanding how all organisms including human beings, organize themselves and interact with their environments. So environment is very important in activism, right? So how the human beings are actually organizing themselves and interacting with the environment. Um, this is by Begg 2013. That was one of the readings. Another reading that I did from Samara and Davis. With inactivism, the individual is understood to be part of, that is, a subsystem to, a series of increasingly complex systems, such as a classroom, a school, a neighborhood, a culture, humanity, the biosphere. And why is it important to know that, right? Most of the time, our math questions, the way that we have them, or that the way we think about math, we are mostly talking about okay, it's in this setting, this is what's happening. But a being is a complex system, is a subsystem of several things, right? So one of the important things to, as someone mentioned previously, I don't remember who was talking about this, maybe it was Corey, that we need to be involving the learners. Oh, it was someone from the Jamboard, yeah. So we need to be involving multiple voices in the classroom, right? So the learners and things like that. So it's very important for us to recognize that we as educators are not just the top beings, like the hierarchy in the hierarchy, and just telling what to do to our students. Yes, there is going to be some teaching part, but a lot of it should be some sort of facilitation, right? And when I'm talking about facilitation, it's more about involving the students, their voices, how, what their experiences are, and how do they think about, how do they see math as well. So try to provide an environment of inquiry, sharing, and learning. So that environment, remember when we are talking about as an ideology, let me go back a few slides. Well, that's a fair few slides that we're going back at. Um, so the recognition of valuing of all student differences as reflected in content, pedagogy, and assessment tools, right? So this is very important. We need to really be able to recognize and value the student differences and how they see or learn math. And that's very important for us. So let me go back. Um, okay, yeah. So this if you have any questions, please ask. But as you notice that it's slowly getting related, or it's getting making a connection with what we just talked about so far as well. So the inactivist theory, um, as you'll see here, um, is talking about the relationship with the environment. And we know that decolonizing and indigenizing is also part of it. There is a lot of parts that is relationship with land and environment. Okay. So inactivism emphasizes knowing rather than knowledge. And that's what I was talking about when I said, don't just think about it as a noun, it's knowledge or something. It's like, it's the emphasis is on knowing, right? Different ways of knowing. And activism as well as decolonization does the same thing. To this, we may parallel and include indigenous wisdom, sensibilities, spiritualities, which do not view the multi species world as resources to be exploited and profited from, but as kin and nations to be partnered with in teaching, learning, living, and dying well. So, what does that really mean? Most, as I said before, the humans are in the hierarchy, right? Everything is about them, right? And they are profiting from different resources that we have, like resources that we have around us. But in indigenous wisdom and sensibilities or spirituality, the species that we have around us are not seen as resources to be exploited or profited from. They are seen as kins. So the older siblings, as I mentioned in one of the slides before, or the relatives or the kins, who are they? They are the plants, the mountains. So it's not just about the species, but also the environment, right? So they are our older siblings, the animals around us, right? And it's good to learn from them through the relationships that we have with the environment. And I'll give you an example of that actually. And this is from one of my readings. And in fact, let's actually read that reading together. It's a short story that was mentioned in one of the readings, and I always like to think about this because it's so it really well in a really nice way talks about all the things that we were mentioning. So Willie Allengui's story. This is from one of the readings I did, Enhancing School Mathematics Culturally: A Path of Reconciliation. Um, Mathematicians create highly complex sets of equations that model equally complex phenomena in the physical world, such as weather forecasting. So it was Willie Alengui, a professional mathematician and member of the indigenous Kankanaey Nation in the Philippines. Large, tall, vertical rice paddy terraces captured his interest. I'm trying to understand how water is efficiently distributed in all the paddies, he told Saleh, a reporter from the Australia Broadcasting Corporation. But every time he tested a revised model of water distribution, his model failed. A non indigenous mathematician may have given up perplexed. Willie, however, had two ways of seeing this problem. So that's where the two eyed seeing comes in. The perspective of his non indigenous mathematics colleagues and his own indigenous perspective. He decided to observe farmers working on the terrace and forge a relationship with them. Willie discovered a key variable that determines how the Kankanaey rice irrigation system works: the ethic of cooperation. The community's social responsibility played a role when water was scarce. The farmers near the top of the terrace would lessen their intake to equally share water with those below. Social responsibility erratically interfered with Willie's mathematical models. Platonist equations are unable to deal with social responsibility. This incident caused Willie to broaden his perspective as a mathematician. My mathematics may be deficient. It's not the be all and end all of everything. It's just one way of looking at the world. So Kankanaey mathematizing includes the value of social responsibility. How can mathematical equations incorporate an ethical value into mathematical modeling? Willie thought it may not be possible. He went on to describe Platonist content as a powerful and arrogant field that marginalized other mathematical knowledge systems. Willie's story strongly suggests to me that cross-cultural school mathematics teaching materials should be all include in their titles mathematics, a cultural way of knowing. Okay, so I'm sure you all notice that it's not saying that that mathematical model is incorrect, right? So he created a mathematical model, great, but it wasn't working in that environment. So the relationship with each other, with the environment, and with all the other things, the water distribution, and there's a lack of water, then what happens and how they are reacting to that situation. That social responsibility aspect does not it's not it cannot be calculated into the mathematical model. But if you didn't have two-eyed seeing, you might not be able to see it. So it's just about understanding and realizing that mathematics is not just one way of seeing and knowing, but multiple ways and seeing and knowing that could come from the culture, the environment, the beings, the relationship with all the beings around them, etc. Okay, let's go back quickly. Oops. Okay, just a few more things to talk about, and then we'll call it a day. Um, so I did mention culturally responsive math, and it's important that to think about in this case in terms of indigenous math, the importance of language and culture, how that also affects the way we teach and learn math. Mindful of tokenism, I already spoke about that. Mindful of different cultures and their math learnings, and two-eyed seeing. These are very important in culturally responsive math. Let's talk about hidden curriculum because that comes into equity a lot as well. So let's go back to our Jamboard and then we'll do a couple of things in there and we'll be done, okay? So let's go back, Jamboard. So I don't know why my Jamboard is taking its sweet time to load, but hope everyone has it loaded. So all I want you to do is go to the fourth screen. on the Jamboard. So just move on to the fourth screen and you will see an example here. So for example, you are an instructor, you're in a classroom and you say, see, it's easy. You can all do it. Okay. So think about what various interpretations can a student take away from such a comment from their instructor? And what assumptions is the instructor making about the students in the situation? Okay, that they're stupid because they can't do it. This, okay. If anyone has any questions, please share.
There was one question from Asma in the chat, and I think you kind of elaborated a bit on it already, but she was wondering if you could elaborate on ethics in math.
Mm-hmm. So I did mention the Willie Allen Gray story. That's one way of thinking about ethics, right? And 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 as I said, when you're talking about culturally responsive math, right, it's important to relate it to the culture, or in our case, of course, we have students from multiple cultures, but one of the things to note is that we definitely have a huge responsibility towards the land we are on. So which means that the indigenous way of knowing and being is very important as well. But at the same time, in the classroom, it's very important to know multiple ways of how our students are thinking about. So that collaborative space of interaction, and everyone has a voice and they are sharing, and it's not just one person or one way of doing. This is how I've done it all my life. This is in the textbook. This is how we're going to do it, right? So when we're talking about ethics, it's going to be, first of all, multiple voices, right? And also the other thing that I've found from our readings is about the relationship with the environment. So inserting a lot of questions that are about math, but also social responsibility, that also talk about it, are kind of wound up in the context, right? Environmental causes and things like that. Like, it's very important, but make sure that they don't become tokenistic, because a lot of our questions have become that. If you look at any of the questions from business math, for example, you'll see, and I'm not pinpointing business math as one entity, there are lots of other math have the same, just that just popped into my mind right now. So when I think about business math as well, lots of those questions you'll see, okay, dollar, tax, loony, toonie, like whoever is someone who just landed, okay, is an international student, how are they going to know what a loony or a toonie means, right? Many of those questions are so steeped in assumptions that you need to really elaborate on it and make sure that the student is understanding what it is. At the same time, maybe even learning from it. That's fine. If you want to keep the loony and toonie into the question wording, that's fine. But elaborate a bit on more on what it is, right? Or what context is it in, so that students feel that they are the people who are trying to solve the problem, who are in that live context and things like that. Like tokenism, I've noticed many times some of the math questions, they have names. um, uh, they in terms of thinking about multiculturalism, they might put in names that are maybe an Indian. When I say Indian, I mean a person from India, right? So that name in, or Chinese name, a person's name in, and that is like multiple voices, but it's not, right? The way people think, that ethics is very important, right? So you can think about ethics in different ways, multiple voices. You can think about it in terms of the environment, social responsibility, etc. I hope that answers your question, dear. And as we were trying to answer that question, lots of comments here, amazing. Let me read a couple and then we'll move on to the next slide because it's related, okay? So that they are stupid because they can't do it. I'm the only one that doesn't understand, right? You're bringing that out in the student. Professor is assuming they all see the problem the same way. The word all is inclusive. It may motivate the weaker students to try as well. Oh, that's an interesting thought. So you're thinking that this is fine, okay? That could be one of the assumptions, right? They may think they are the only one who does not understand, that the professor has confidence in our ability, um, creates discomfort from students who don't find the process easy. Yeah, so these are all fair conclusions or assumptions that the instructor is making, right? Um, Now, and this is actually part of the hidden curriculum, right? When you say something, be mindful that whatever you're saying, how's it going to be interpreted, right? And by different students, your student population that you have in your class. And that's an important piece because it could uh, um, lead to interpretations that are going to really weaken their motivation as well. Now, what I've done is move on to this next screen, screen 5. And I would like you to think about a hidden curriculum. Give an example of a hidden curriculum which interrupts or has interrupted equity in the classroom, in your classroom. And how does it relate to a colonized view as well? Just a couple of minutes on this. Think about it. Meanwhile, Derek, if there are any other more questions, I can take one more as people are writing.
No, there's no more questions in the chat right now.
Great, thanks.
Some really great comments, though.
Well, I should read them. Okay, bed mess. Can whoever wrote that elaborate a bit more on the bed mess aspect? It would be nice to know. First students to answer question in the chat may be those with fastest internet speed. That is very interesting. And I've seen that happen in different ways in the classroom, or not just classroom, in meetings as well, you know. Um, and the and your internet might not be working as fast, right? Canadian only, it shouldn't exist. Okay. Uh, long division rather than yeah, this way or that. Yes. Moving fast, accepting answers from fast students, forgetting that there are students who can't follow. Yeah. Um, access to sufficient technology to perform mathematics to expectation of the instructor. Yeah, so there are lots of things. So maybe we'll take this discussion later as well into the Q&A. Let me try to wrap up my session now. Just let me go back. Because I'm mindful of the time, I know. But Maria, I know I'm going to try to wrap it up quick. All right, so that's that. I've also created a Padlet where we could take our discussion further, maybe later as well. And maybe some of these questions you can think about right now. And if you feel we can even discuss in our Q&A later. So these are the questions. How do you plan to decolonize your thoughts and teaching and learning? How do you plan to adapt inclusion in your curriculum? What steps would you consider in order to assist indigenizing the curriculum? What are the difficulties or constraints with implementation? That's also something you need to be mindful of, right? What would you consider being mindful of as you go along this path, right? So these are some of the questions we could put our mindset into that frame so that we are better able to decolonize our minds and our teaching as well. And also think about how we can implement these aspects in the classroom. I will be showing that link in a minute, this Padlet link, but if you want, you can access it through this QR code as well. So again, accessibility, okay? So not just the link, but we also have the code here. Just take a half a minute on that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the next slide now. Okay. So lots of readings, and I should say I don't think that I did all of these. So these references are in 2 pages, In fact, this first page is what I did recently read, okay? And the references that you see here, this is from our last session as well, so I have incorporated back here. But these were not the only readings that I did. There are a few more, but these were one of the key ones that like stood out in my mind, and we used a lot of stuff from here as well. So the first session that we did in October was from these readings, and me and my colleagues, we all worked on it to create the presentation. So you saw a few aspects of that presentation in here as well, but we moved and expanded it a bit more, and after the readings from here, okay? So that's the references. You'll all have access to it. And for land acknowledgements, one of the key resources that I've used, and that's how I created my own land acknowledgement for where I live, is through these resources. So you can find out whose land you live on and what treaties were assigned on those lands. The second resource that I already shared with you in my when I was sharing an action item, definitely read this open resource. This is the video that I was mentioning. Maybe we'll have time to watch it. We'll see. And I'm also sharing how to create your own Jamboard, because that's very useful. We've used it in some of our learnings with our colleagues. So we've been trying to decolonize our minds as well as a team. So we use Jamboard because it's anonymous and everyone can share their thoughts without being judged, right? And it's very collaborative, so very nice Jamboard. And Padlet, of course. Yeah, everyone knows Padlet, I think. Hope. Okay, so not a right thing to say. Everyone knows Padlet, maybe not. Okay, not a right thing to say. So, of course, that's us, presenter, and my very esteemed research partners who I missed thoroughly today. And thank you, and make wedge. That's it.
Shrista, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I know that you also were hoping to show a video, and depending on how we do with the time right now with the Q&A and the discussion, we can see if we have some time to show that video. If you want to stop presenting, and then, yeah, great. And we can open up the floor to any questions. So you can feel free to put any of your questions or comments in the chat, but also you can raise your hand, which you can do using the reactions tab on the bottom, or even just unmute if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to share. Sandra, I know you put some really great comments in the chat during the presentation. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate a little bit on those as well, but I will pass it over now to Derek to facilitate if we have any Q&A to come up.
I really like the comments. Sorry, just mentioning that.
You're catching up on them? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just reading right now. Thank you, Eden, for that question about universal math and decolonial math as well. It's very important to identify what it means, right? Values of Jim has 500 watermelons. Cameron, you're right. Yeah, that's what I meant. Thought about the numbers, right? It doesn't make sense. Yeah, please feel free to ask any question here. And as I said before, I by no means an expert. Okay, I've just tried to share or relay whatever I've literally learned from those readings. And I'm also learning. I'm on that path as well, along with you all, to decolonize.
Krishna, just a comment, and I wrote it down, and I hopefully I wrote it down correctly, but you said something along the lines of make the student feel like they are the ones answering the question. And, you know, I just thought that was a fairly straightforward and easy way to think about, you know, when we're making math questions, because, yeah, I've had to explain to lots of our students over the years what a toonie is, what a loonie is, and yeah, I just thought that was a great way to put it. And I've had to rewrite questions over the years that I've, you know, reused and gone back and looked at and be like, oh, well, they don't know what, you know, like just even young students, you know, what's a floppy disk? Like, I don't know, but I have used questions when I first started teaching that, you know, that was an example. So anyway, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great comment as well. Yeah, and that's true. Like even for like tax and things like that, and every province has different tax, and just having that mentioned that in Ontario or in here or something like that, like even that, even as little as that is so important, right? All right, so I've just shared with everyone a Padlet link. Please feel free to share your thoughts in there as well. Maybe we can take up some comments from there too. If you want, you can, as Maria and Derek mentioned, you can also unmute yourself and talk, or you can also go to that Padlet link. Oh, that's very good, Brenda. I think I've seen that YouTube video. I'll have to check though. Yeah, but I remember there was one land acknowledgement video, which was very interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Trista, did you want to show a little bit of that video that you were hoping to show? It looks like we have a little bit of time, so we can share it with our participants, and then if they'd like to watch the whole thing after, they can.
Definitely. And I always love to watch that video. And I watched it so many times, I can't even tell you how many times I've watched it. And every time the way she's speaking is it pulls you in really, and you really understand what two-eyed seeing means with that. And maybe if we have time, we can even watch that land acknowledgement video. Who knows, right? And again, as I said, please feel free to populate the Padlet as a takeaway as well. Let me find the video and share our screen.
Gue, Nindeluisi Rebecca. Hi, my name is Rebecca. Shall we? The language you speak fundamentally shapes your worldview and everything that goes along with it. And this concept is specifically amplified when it comes to Indigenous languages. Indigenous language weaves its way through every aspect of who we are as people, from how we interact with the physical world, how we build our communities, and how we carry our culture forward. And with that comes a unique perspective. And it's that perspective that I'm going to try to
Trista,
create.
this is the interpreter speaking right now. Can you please turn the closed captionings on?
Oh, definitely. Thank you. Maybe we can rewatch a little bit from back. Yeah, there you go.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. Shall we? The language you speak fundamentally shapes your worldview and everything that goes along with it. And this concept is specifically amplified when it comes to Indigenous languages. Indigenous language weaves its way through every aspect of who we are as people, from how we interact with the physical world, how we build our communities, and how we carry our culture forward. And with that comes a unique perspective. And it's that perspective that I'm going to try to create for you so that when I introduce the concept of eduoptimunk, of two-eyed seeing, you'll understand why it's so important. So to begin, a study published in Psychological Sciences called Two Languages, Two Minds broke down grammatical tools that situate actions in time. They showed photographs to English and German speakers and asked them to describe what was going on in them. So for example, they showed a woman walking in a parking lot. English speakers said, this is a woman walking. Whereas German speakers said, this is a woman walking to her car. They showed another photograph, a man riding his bicycle. Once again, English speakers honed in on the action and said, this is a man riding his bicycle, whereas German speakers needed to add a destination to complete their context, even though that destination wasn't featured in the photograph. This is a man riding his bicycle to the library or to the supermarket. And what's interesting is that English marks events as ongoing. We're very action-oriented in our language. So if I'm writing a poem when my spouse calls and he asks me what I'm doing, I'll say I'm writing, regardless of the fact that I had stopped to answer the phone. German simply doesn't have this feature. And so it's interesting to see the two worldviews these languages carry, even though they have a common root. So what happens when you have a group of people with a language that has no common root but must operate within a completely foreign framework? Specifically, how do Indigenous people find success in a colonized world? Now, the saying, things get lost in translation, rings truer than you might imagine when it comes to Indigenous languages. This is Mi'kmaq territory, and many of you might have heard the word Jalasi to mean welcome. That's what it's used for, but the literal translation of the concept equates to, I'll do my best. That's a much more nuanced and meaningful interaction. In this moment, a person-to-person contract is being agreed upon. Think about that. In this moment, I will try for you. Language isn't just something we use to get our points across. As I said, it's woven into who we are as people and our notions of a broader identity. So Robert Thomas, no relation, wrote about that broader identity, and he called it peoplehood when referring to Indigenous peoples. Now, the term peoplehood is a little bit odd, so I'm going to break it down for you. Peoplehood differs from identity in that it not only encompasses the individual identity, but how that person ties it to a larger collection of peoples and how that in turn connects them to other people within that collective. So for example, I don't speak Mi'kmaq and I grew up off reserve, but I still identify as a Mi'kmaq person. I'm still within the concept of a Mi'kmaq peoplehood, and that in turn connects me to somebody who grew up on reserve and who speaks the language. And it's getting a bit complex, so please bear with me. Peoplehood is made up of 4 things: territory, sacred history, ceremonial cycle, and language. Each thread informs the other. You can't address a single aspect of it without looking at the whole. Think of a spider web. If you clip a single thread that anchors it, the whole thing starts to collapse. So the Mi'kmaq language, for example, with its unique characteristics, gives meaning to a sacred history which dictates the use of the land, which is crucial to the appropriate execution of a ceremonial cycle, which in turn is performed in many of the languages that those ceremonies encompass. So firstly, that is a direct quote from my MA, so I'm going to take this moment and feel vindicated in my decision to pursue another arts degree. And secondly, Indigenous peoples are complicated and complex. Imagine centuries ago when we were writing the treaties and the language we were communicating in encompassed how we would use the land, how would we carry our culture forward, how would we develop relationships with the settlers and colonizers. Now, how much of that was lost in translation when they were recorded in English and French? So I digress, but remember those 4 strands: language, ceremonial cycle, territory, and sacred history. The best part about peoplehood is that it is tremendously flexible. We can swap out and alter some of those strands without compromising our status as Indigenous people. So once again, I'm going to use my lived experience as an example. You already know I don't speak Mi'kmaq, and that's because through residential school, my primary language thread has been replaced with English and French. So if I go to a ceremony that's conducted entirely in the Mi'kmaq language, the significance of that ceremony might not fully resonate with me because I won't understand the full scope of what's being said, but that does not diminish who I am as a Mi'kmaq person. Furthermore, there are many Mi'kmaq people who are practicing Catholics. So even though they smudge and they dance and they drum and they sweat, they also go to church and pray in the Mi'kmaq language, and that does not take away from them. They have woven another set of ceremonies into their ceremonial thread. Because being an Indigenous person is a lived experience. There's no spectrum whereby somebody is more or less native than somebody else. Any arguments over authenticity are us internalizing a history of colonialism that has created rubrics and tools to measure our ethnicity. And blood quantum has nothing to do with it. The fact that my mother is non-native does not take away from the fact that I am a Mi'kmaq person. So with that said, I'm going to check in with you guys. Language shapes your worldview and is one of 4 aspects that create an indigenous peoplehood, an indigenous understanding of knowing of how the world works. So when you look at the picture that I'm trying to paint for you, you're going to understand what you're looking at. So here's the picture. Indigenous peoples are the fastest growing demographic in Canada. Our median age is 28 years old compared to that of 43 to the non-native world. And what that means is you're going to see more of us in your classrooms, in your workspaces, and in your public spaces. The world is going to have to learn to interact with us in ways that are more meaningful and significant than what they have done in the past. I don't need to elaborate for you all to know we don't have the best history. So what? That's the question I always get asked. How does this apply to the real world? I work in student services, in education. I act as a go-between for the native and non-native world. I advocate for students who have a hard time speaking up about themselves. I coach faculty on how to have appropriate cultural supports. And yet, in spite of what I try to do, sometimes the effects an Indigenous student feels are too great, and they leave to go home. And it's not that they're not smart, it's not that they aren't capable of doing the work, it's just that this world doesn't get them. Our protocols, our concepts of time, our ethics, etc., are just different. And it doesn't mean we can't communicate with your world. We've been doing it for the better part of 5 centuries. It's that we ask that you now try to communicate with our world. And it is at this moment that I introduced the concept of eduaptamunk, of two-eyed seeing. It was introduced by Elder Albert Marshall. Two-eyed seeing takes the strengths of both a colonized world and both an indigenous world and asks that the user see through both lenses simultaneously to find success. It is the Mi'kmaq understanding of the gift of multiple perspectives, to see multiple contexts simultaneously. For example, you see Nova Scotia, Nouvelle-Écosse, Canada. We see Mi'kma'ki, traditional territory, Turtle Island. It's not either or, it's both at the same time. Two-eyed seeing was originally introduced to build greater capacity for STEM programming for Indigenous students in post-secondary institutions and is now being adopted nationally by organizations and institutions who are interested in transcultural collaboration. Two-eyed seeing implies responsibilities for reciprocity, mutual accountability, and co-learning. It's what we tried to build our treaties on. We want you to know about us and we want success in this world, but we are no longer willing to give up our world to do it. And you might be asking yourself, why would I go through so much trouble to indigenize the institution for such a small number of students? And the answer, my friends, is beautiful. It has been shown, it has been proven that when institutions implement Indigenous pedagogy and learning styles, students across the board benefit, native and non-native. Because we recognize the multiple contexts and paradigms that learners learn through, our ways of teaching have traditionally been more universal and more inclusive. So, with all of my academic speak and concept introduction, I bring it back to the elders who always tend to say it best. With regards to education and relationship building, according to Albert Marshall, the foundational basis of any relationship is an exchange of stories. So as a storyteller and as a poet, I will leave you all with what I do best. A poem entitled Eduaptamunk. I lost my talk, said Rita Jo. For me, I was never given the option to know, to feel the flow of the words as they rolled off my tongue, giving me the lyrics of how our world was sung. My perspective was spun using the threads of both your world and theirs, left to cobble together a spirit from rags and tears, painfully aware that I was different. Through hard work and determination, I found my indigenous articulation, a compilation of two ways makes up the sum of me. You have two eyes, yet you only have one view. Your way is best, you would argue. Centuries of being in position to subdue those who would aspire. They say the sun never set on the British Empire, and because we recognize the hubris that defines your story, we have both a sunrise and a sunset in our territory. With my heart and eyes, I have a completely different view. The consequence of my skin comes in an entirely different hue. Don't you see? Although you represent us, we think very differently than you because we see the world not through one set of eyes, but through two. Thousands of years long, we were independent, proud, and strong. We belong to this earth. The way power belongs to money and privilege to birth, we put our communities first. But then came the fleets, filled with those you would ironically define today as come from away to invade every inch of our world, to break our spirits and pull the threads that would unfurl us, to catch the way you speak. But this is not a poem for the retelling of a one-sided history. Each of our worlds has their strengths. Yours is in power. It gets to eat its cake and define race. It has the ability to unapologetically take up space if societal progress is linear. This society is top tier, terra nullius, as though we were never here. It must be nice to be so confident. This society is ubiquitous, built on reified rubrics of tradition and rhetoric. Your notions of diversity are ad hoc in nature, an afterthought feature to an immovable structure. But this is not a conviction nor an acquittal. Just the voice coming from an eye trained to be critical. And if you push the two sides of our Venn diagram together, you'll get our circle. We were never meant to be static like the rivers around us. We shift and change and remain dynamic. We bring something to the table that is able to change your worldview and show you what we are capable of, that a lot can come from a holistic concept of the earth. You are not a plague, nor we a curse or a problem in need of a solution, and we've got to rid ourselves of the spiritual dissolution, the dilution of our treaties written to share this land. And I ask that you understand that we are the experts on what we need. Don't feed us your good intentions. Carefully laid apologies will not get you an historical exemption. We plan our actions for the next 7 generations, and we invite you to do the same. Open your other set of eyes. Take a pause and start breathing. Welcome to the world of two-eyed seeing. Thank you. Walalia.
So, any thoughts, reflections? Again, feel free to put them in the Padlet or in the chat. That would be great. One of the things about decolonizing I definitely wanted to mention is that it's going to be highly uncomfortable for every one of us, and that's okay, because that's learning as well, right? And every time I actually watch that, I get emotional too. So sorry about that, if you see me a little bit teary-eyed. But yeah, again, if you have any questions, please ask away. Thank you.
Shrista, I'm not seeing any comments. Yes, absolutely, is very emotional. I agree with you, Brenda. I'm not seeing questions coming up or the hands going up, and I do know that I am seeing some folks need to leave for meetings, so I'm gonna maybe say, as we are wrapping up right now, if there are any last minute comments or questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat. But also, if anything comes up at a later time, we have various ways of sharing with our members in the OCMA. So we have our online, newsletters that we share out, we send out, we have emails that we send out, we have our Facebook page that we share on. So these PD sessions are fabulous for bringing us all together at one time, but that doesn't mean the communication stops. So by all means, as we reflect, which is one of the key messages I'm taking away from this, the importance of reflection on ourselves and how we behave and the life we live. As you reflect after this presentation, by all means, please share if something does come up that you'd like to share with your colleagues. And again, I will mention that as Corey mentioned at the beginning, that we are looking very forward, and it seems more and more likely every single day that in October we will all come together again and at Fern in Aurelia, and be able to have some wonderful sharing there as well together. And there will be opportunity for in-person at the conference as well as hybrid. So anyone that's not able to attend in person can join us remotely. So we will definitely share more of that information. Yes, absolutely, Sandra. We're very excited, finally. So Shrista, I'm going to ask if there's any last minute thoughts that you wanted to share with the group before we close this session.
Thank you, Maria. So I would just say that I'm going to keep the links live. So if you want to keep sharing in the Jamboard link or the Padlet link, feel free to do so. Hopefully we can have more discussions and reflections in those spaces as well. And yeah, if you have any questions, and reflections is in the moment as well as after, right? And that's fine too. So if you have any reflections later and you have a question to ask, feel free to reach out too. If you want, I can leave my email here as well, just in case. And yeah, keep learning, keep decolonizing.
Thank you very much, Tristan. I know I speak on behalf of everyone, thanking you for your time and the amazing sharing today. Trista, I'm just going to remind everyone that we have recorded this, that you will also be sharing your presentation, and we will post that on the OCMA site in the coming days. And maybe if you can include, when you send me your presentation, include a screenshot of the Jamboard comments. We can include those as well, so people can see what was written. I think that would be really great, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. And it's anonymous, so definitely we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, wonderful. So thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful having you with us today. Wishing you a wonderful day and a wonderful summer. We won't be having any activities through the summer. This was the last time for us to come together as OCMA members. So all the best to you. But remember, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, we'll be in touch. Take care, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm looking at the wonderful comments. Thank you.